Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Gospel. I have with me once again Ben Schneider, and Ben is with us to talk about those understandable objections. This is going to be part 2, and we're going to talk about another very serious topic that Ben dealt with and addressed. Ben, we thank you for being here again.
Thanks, Danny. Good to be here.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I was wondering if you were going to come back or not.
It was in the script. I think I had to. I'm just kidding.
Oh, that's what I wrote down.
That's what you wrote down for me. No. Totally kidding. My
Okay.
pleasure.
Yeah. It's good to have you, obviously. Understandable objections. This is the second part, and we're going to center in on the question, the great question that so many people have asked. And I think, as you stated to me earlier, whether believer or unbeliever, the question is God fair? And that just can address so many different situations that we find ourselves in. Where is he now? Should he do this or should he not? You know, what role does God play in this moment in my life? Is what God does, is it fair? And for Ben, which we introduced in the last podcast, Ben has gone through a long period of time, several years ultimately, drilling down on the message of the gospel. I think in that process of time, you considered Christians around you the way that they were kind of dealing with the gospel as Christians in their own lives and learning from that, and then needing to get God's answers to those very serious questions that you had. Because if you had gotten to a point where you said, no one can tell me what God's answer is to this or that would be a huge stumbling block for you because, and again, this is why you're so interesting to me, you were really trying to get there, but needed to do it in all honesty with yourself. And that makes this very unique to, I think most people go through this at some level. You had some understandable objections to what was being taught and even revealed in the Word of God. And so let's start to talk about, is God fair, and how that kind of crept up with you and then what you did about it.
Yeah, and some of the things I think about in terms of what I wrestled with, I felt were a little more personal, but I think this comes up for many people. And it's clearly something that's used in objection to the idea of God or there being a Bible, or the Bible being truth rather, and in many circumstances, right? People point to all of the things that happen in the world and go, okay, well, a loving God wouldn't allow this to happen, right?
Yeah.
And how there's suffering, there's horrible things that happen in this world. They're seemingly innocent, we'll use that term kind of loosely, right? But seemingly innocent, quote unquote, people who have bad things happen to them. Or undeserving, maybe is a slightly better word, but even then,
sure.
Still somewhat subjective. But yes, things that we just can't imagine or that just seem horrible, tragic, painful happen in this world. And so that is often used. And it was, again, a thing that I was wrestling with is like, all right, how does that happen, right? If God truly loves us, if he cares about us, how does he enable that evil to happen, or how does he allow that suffering, or how is that considered fair? It's just not fair, right? Which is sort of how we say it in our childlike way, right? But
yes,
it's not fair, right? And we hear our kids say it and all that kind of stuff, but it is. It's a real thing to wrestle with, and it was certainly a part of it for me. Though, like, simultaneously, just outside in life, I'm a father. My kids are young, and I just look at things happening, to them that are not nearly on the level of tragedy or suffering, but they stink, right? Like, and it's stuff that is seemingly, at least to their perspective, not fair. And then you come back and, like, separating anything about faith or anything, you come back and how many times do you say, well, sorry, kid, life isn't fair, right?
Yeah.
Like, we use that all the time. It becomes a bit trite, but it's because we look around and it's true, right? Even not trying to put God in the equation. So those things are kind of happening in parallel, and I wasn't really relating them at first, but then there kind of became a convergence of that.
So kids, like you said, my kids did it too. They come to you and they say, that's not fair. So now all of a sudden, in a very tiny way, you're put in the position of God.
Right.
Because they're talking to you and they're saying, that's not fair and you should do something about that, whether it's the way you treated the first, second, and third child, or it's on a football team, soccer team, baseball team. What coach did wasn't fair. And so now, and as a dad, as a parent, you can hear what they're saying. Maybe you saw it unfold on the field even, and just as well as they do, that was not fair. And yet, you have to say something to them along the lines of, life isn't fair.
Right.
Which is, you're going to have to swallow this jagged pill because this is not the last time you're going to be treated unfairly, especially in your own estimation. And so maybe there was were empathetic towards what you were asking God to show you, maybe.
Yeah.
Because you're almost in the same scenario, except you're the little one saying, I've looked at this closely and it's not fair. And so why? Show me why so that I can know either more about you, learn to love you in that, or realize that you aren't even there. Either way, you would be able to come to that conclusion that you needed to get to. And you talked about some of those more serious ones like long-term suffering, the loss of a loved one, newlywed couple losing a baby, just in the first year or two. It's like
There's
there's
things you can't rationalize. Right?
nothing about that is fair.
Yeah.
And no one knows what to say, It's so awful. And this causes us to look up to heaven and say, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
Please show us what good is supposed to come out of this, And so that happens to everybody in their lifetimes. And if you over sympathize with your kids about what happened on the field, then you're almost setting them up for more discontentedness with other things that won't be fair, like those worse events in life, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
I mean,
and the thing about one of the things that was interesting about it's a trivial example to take something like coaching kids, in recreational sports or something, right? They're at a young age, but I think it's a good example because it shows a different side of this as well, which is fair is a pretty lousy way to judge things too, right? Like it's in the eye of the beholder, right? It's subjective. So using this example, it's easier whenever it's not something so drastic and tragic. But here we are coaching kids and it's recreational league and the rules are such that, all the kids on the team play the same amount. Doesn't matter if they came to practice, doesn't matter if they're good, right? Like that's not what it's about. It's everybody learning, everybody having fun, being active, enjoying the game, snacks after, but you're still trying to win the game. And so, whether you're a coach or you're one of the kids who's better, who doesn't get to go in at the end of the game when they could probably, it's a tight game. And if they were in there, you probably win, you probably score or you prevent that score, whatever it is, but it's not their rotation and it's not right to put them in over somebody else who hadn't gotten their last rotation, right? Because that's the way it was set up. Those were the rules by which we were operating by. And so, but you kind of step back from it and say, oh, was it fair that the better kid didn't get to play? Or is it fair that not everybody got to play equal time? Well, you can't resolve those. Like, it depends on who you ask. Right?
Exactly. Not everyone will be happy.
And we can extrapolate this to adults too. We look around and say, well, is it fair that somebody who's smarter or had more opportunities, makes more money in life or has a nicer house or a nicer, like we look at all those things and well, it's not fair. They got there in an unfair way or whatever. And at the same time we say, well, is it also fair to penalize someone who maximized their advantages? And there's countless examples. I just use those because they're so easy and they come to mind and we all instantly kind of get a poke about them. Mm-hmm. And so you look at that and you go, there is no fair outcome in those situations. Like there isn't anything to make that perfectly fair for everybody. It's all relative. So it's a pretty lousy standard. I came to loathe. In fact, I would tell the kids, like, I don't want to hear you say it's not fair because there's nothing to do about that. That is not any sort of standard that we can look at. What there are, though, in that case of like the coaching in the games, there were rules and we went by the rules.
Right.
And the parallel that started to draw for me, like I've mentioned previously when I've talked, it wasn't like an epiphany, but just things that sort of worked and, I started gluing things together that I hadn't before. And that glued one of those things to get together for me, which is, well, from the perspective of the kid, of should the better kids play or should everybody play equal time or whatever, that challenges their perception of fair. And as you get older and you play competitive sports, well, what is fair is to put the best kids out there and the other ones are only there if there's an emergency. And that's what's considered fair because the game changes, the rules change. So it's not about fair, it's about what is just relative to the standard that has been set. And when they were young and we were playing recreational, the standard was everybody plays equal amount of time.
And that's just.
And that's just. That is the just thing to do. And when you're older, the standard is we play the best players. You will not play unless, somebody else gets hurt or you're needed or you end up being better than somebody else.
That's right.
You understand that. Those are the rules. That is also just. And so I started looking at that and having to explain that lesson, again, separate from faith, separate from the Bible. But it started clicking with me that like we focus so much on our assessment of God's fairness we're not paying attention to the fact that what God is just. Fairness is what we care about. And what he cares about is being just. He laid out standards. He laid out what we need to do to obey. He laid out rules, if you will. And that's what he's measuring against. And that's what's important. And that was one piece of it. And I think the other piece of it that I got into a little bit is we're impatient. So our perception of fairness always has to do with how quick it is. We want it swiftly.
Yes,
right?
we do.
The ref made a bad call, then we want punishment for it right then, right? Like whatever it is, we want that now. And God being eternal, time is not an issue, right? It's on his relative scale of what is swift, which all of our lives collectively are, just a wisp of anything, right? Like,
right.
And it feels long to us, but it's virtually nothing to him.
I love that you just transitioned in your thought process, just because of just the basic things that are happening in life, that if you search the Bible and you look up the two words God and fair, that they're not together. Isn't that interesting? I was just thinking about that as you were saying that, but he is just, and he calls himself just many times. In Romans 3:25, it says that God sent Jesus forth as a propitiation by his blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance, God has passed over the sins that were previously committed, to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So as you said, the plan, the parameters, the rules are laid out. And now he is just in becoming and being the justifier of those who have faith in his Son, whom he sent. It has nothing to do with fair. It is, do you see Jesus? Do you know that he's died for your sins? Will you accept that? Because that's God's offer. And if you say no, and you say, well, I thought I'd get into heaven by doing a bunch of good deeds without Jesus, you won't go to heaven, because Jesus says in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. There's one way to God. God's made that abundantly clear in his word. So then he is on both sides just. When he says to one, you have no part with me, and to another, come in, blessed, beloved. You are now allowed to enter the kingdom. You are a good and faithful servant. And you say, well, how in the world is that fair? He never mentioned fair, did he?
Right.
So it seems to me that in that progression of time that you really just switched words or your vocabulary to what God was saying, and you go, oh, well, there it is.
And I think that's a big part of it. And words can be trivial because they mean almost the same things, but it's also really important because the differences are important differences. And that's not to say that in being, you could, there's a little bit of being provocative by saying God isn't fair, or God doesn't care to be fair, for sure. And that instead what he cares about is justice. I mean, that is the fairness that he talks about. This is how we will judge. This is what I have laid out. And it's very clear, and he is consistent in that. And I think in looking at it in that perspective, because it removes this sort of subjective component of, well, one person sinned less or one person sinned more, and how do we measure that? Because that's what we tend to do as humans, right? In everything.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And we would apply it here too. Like, why did that person get in? They murdered somebody and I didn't, and that doesn't seem fair.
No.
Those weren't the criteria. It depends. What did that person do after that? Did they repent? What was their heart? Same thing for me, right? Even if I haven't done any quote unquote big sins throughout my life, did I ever actually, though, humble myself? Did I come to God? Those are the things that he has laid out. And that's the criteria, not ours, which tends to be more subjective and comparative, where he's setting out an absolute standard.
I want to ask you something. Do you think that now, based on your current understanding and what the Bible teaches, that in the way that he's just and giving the same to all to take or to deny, to refuse, that isn't that fair? Doesn't he become fair in that process because he's just?
Yes, I think what makes it fair is he's laid it out. He's told us, and he's given us the choice. So I've told you and there's like even in presentations and speaking and stuff and doing like educational sessions, they talk about how you say, I tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I tell you, and then I tell you what I told you.
Yeah, right. I'm going to hammer it in, man.
And like, that's what he's done, right? He said, I'm telling you what I'm going to do and what has to be done about it. And then I'm giving you examples, and then I'm showing through the history of my people and through everything I've done laid out in my word, how I've been consistent about that before. And I'm telling you what's going to happen next. And here are the options around it. And so, yeah, I mean, ultimately I think that it recalibrates sort of like, well, it is fair to stick to what you said you were going to do and to do it the way you did it. And it was fair that you told me ahead of time, right? Like what really is my reason or in what way can I justify that that's not fair, right? Just because I don't like the criteria. Well, that was the other thing that's hard for us to do sometimes is humble ourselves and say it's not our criteria to set. Right. And I think one of the verses when I talked about this before that I mentioned was Proverbs 16:11. Just balance and scales are the Lord's, all the weights in the bag are his work. And I think we struggle with this a lot where we want to have the criteria to judge, so long as it's not put back on us. Like, don't judge me by my own criteria. I just want to judge everybody else's.
That's right.
So yeah, I think ultimately it is fair. And that's why I say it's a bit provocative to say he isn't. What it is it's a recalibration of what things does he care about and what things does he want us to pay attention to versus what we tend to focus on.
Man, and that's a great passage. Proverbs 16:11, a just balance and scales are the Lord's. They're true. They're perfectly balanced so that when something's set on them, that it'll weigh out the way that it should. In the follow-up, all the weights in the bag are his work. So there's no discrepancies with those weights. It's consistent, which again makes that fair, but it also insists that what's being measured is just against the weights that God has provided. And I think there's 3 or 4 proverbs that say the Lord hates diverse weights and measures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does someone go into a marketplace and change the weight of that scale, even though it says 5 pounds? They've chipped off the bottom half of it. It's 2.5 pounds, so that they can either make or take money that's not theirs. That God hates that because justice, not fairness.
Right.
It's not fair. But the justice has been perverted, and that's the core of what makes the Lord angry. So he can't, as you said, he can't give us all of these things, both in his actions and in his written word, that consistently say the same and then make an exception for you or anybody else when it comes to justice.
Right. And that's definitely our tendency. I mean, we get, we hear the story or we're concerned about somebody or somebody's close to us or we favor somebody and we will look for ways to justify or rationalize or do things because, it pulls at our heart or whatever. And it's not wrong to have empathy and sympathy and all those sort of things, but it is incredibly hard to be consistent. And especially like you just look at people and even those of us who are relatively more consistent than others, I'm not claiming that I'm one by any stretch, but if you look over the course of our lives and how we handle things, we're not consistent, and God is. And like I go back to that coaching point, like say, what do you mean? How would we be inconsistent? Well, I guarantee that, that youth coach thinking that it's not fair when their kid doesn't get to play because somebody else's is better, would then flip around and think the opposite down the road whenever it's, hey, everybody should have equal playing time, and the kid's not good. Like your criteria will change.
That's right.
Mine does, depending upon which team I'm pulling for and against and whether or not that penalty was legit or not, like it does. And I will acknowledge that I don't see eye to eye with the refs, largely depending upon the jersey color that they called against. But
it's so true.
it's a hard thing to fight.
Yes.
And that's why it's ultimately not ours to decide.
Yeah. That's such a good
on the
point.
big things, on the important stuff. Now, it's easy to look at that stuff and reconcile it that way. It's still harder when you look at the tragedies of the world and things that happen to people that are very serious and heartbreaking and still kind of hold up the same thing. But again, that's where I went to the sort of the second piece of this, which is God in his judgment and in his being just, first of all, equates that to eternity. So both on a time scale in terms of what time frame he cares about. We see it in the context of a lifetime. And he's
our lifetime,
or that person that it happened to, right? And he's looking at it in the context of eternity. So that adjusts things quite a bit. And eternity in the sense, not just the time scale, but that he's talking about not just what happens while we're on earth and in this life, which could be great or could be awful or could be anywhere in between. It is for what happens after.
Yeah.
And therefore he's more concerned about that. When you sort of try to take on that weight, the long game, if you will, like even if you just try to pull it into us, right? Like our lives and say, okay, my kids, there are things that they do and I can sort of see the long game and they're frustrated right now that I won't do what they want me to do right this minute for whatever reason. And I'm just not going to, but I know that in the long run, this is the right decision and it's going to work out and I can see it and they can't. Like we have those things that we know. Mm-hmm. You're going to stick to this or you're not dropping out of this or you're going to, go learn this or you're going to stick with this job, whatever it is that we make them often do that they don't want to, or that we hold out on. I'm not giving you this until you earn these things, whatever it is. We see that all the time and we play that back. At least, I see it in our lives all the time whenever I'm as a father, as a parent and stuff. And I can even look back on it whenever I was the kid, relative to the parents and stuff. And we're perfectly okay justifying it then because I know more than you and I can see how this is going to play out. You're just going to have to be patient and wait on it.
This is something you need to see, learn, and understand. The only way to learn it is to walk through it.
That's right.
And I would submit for you that your heart didn't go cold in that decision.
Exactly.
Oftentimes your heart is with him. Yeah, it's like
maybe it's trivial and it's not a big deal, but there were times and there are times still whenever it's something where I want to just fix this, but I know it's not the right thing to do. Or I'm even questioning, sometimes even when I knew it was the right decision, but it felt painful because they were unhappy. And I felt pained by that. You go to the other cliche, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. Right. And
kids love that.
Yeah, I don't believe you. But there is a truth where it does. I know sitting with my wife and having conversations, did we make the right call there? I'm pretty sure we did, but also I feel awful. So I need some sort of assurance that we're making the right call on something. Yeah. And we see that play out, right? And more often than not, we know, yes, it was the right way to do it. We had to be patient. But we don't necessarily allow God that same patience.
Oh, no. Not when we're involved. We've said several times now that the Bible that points out there's moments and situations. And so really, I think it's helpful to mention to everybody, if you're thinking about this or it's something you have worked through in the past or you're in the middle of working through that Psalm 73 is a great place to turn. I'm just going to read a few verses from Psalm 73 because what the psalmist Asaph does here is he presents what he sees to be unfair to God. And he really is saying, you better do something about it. And Asaph's not the only one. There are minor prophets that say, Lord, you can't punish your holy people by an unrighteous people. Prophets are saying to him, this isn't right. And yet God, just as you pointed out with the parents. So Asaph in Psalm 73, I'm just going to read a few verses from it. It says, truly God is good to Israel, to such as are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For there are no pangs in their death, but their strength is firm. They are not in trouble as other men, nor are they plagued like other men. Their pride serves as their necklace. Violence covers them like a garment. Their eyes bulge with abundance. They have more than any heart could wish. And then down in verse 11, he starts to make the comparison to the wicked, sinful people who are benefiting to those who are faithful. He says in verse 11, they say, this is the wicked, how does God know? And is there knowledge in the Most High? Behold, these are the ungodly who are always at ease. They increase in riches. Surely I've cleansed my heart in vain, and I've washed my hands in innocence. For all day long I have been plagued and chastened every morning. So he's really letting God have it. I've been cleansing my heart and washing my hands of all evil. And here it is. It looks like it's nothing but vanity. And then the beautiful process that Asaph goes through picks up in 17. He says, until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I understood their end. Surely you shall set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Verse 23, nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold me by my right hand. You will guide me with your counsel, and afterward receive me to glory. I can't stop thinking about the child and the father connection that you made. Think about a kid when you say, no, I hear you, but we're going to have to do this the hard way. There's something you need to learn, that somewhere a light comes on for your child. Imagine your kid coming back to you and they said to you, I was so foolish and ignorant. I was like a beast before you, Father. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold me by your right hand. That'll bring a tear to any father's eye. You will guide me with your counsel, and afterward receive me to glory. That's the message.
Yeah.
You stick with me. You continue to do what's right, because I am a God who blesses, not today, not because you wanted this food and not that food, not because there's only some water and you wanted a bunch of water. It's because eternity waits for those who are faithful. And so in this testing ground, to take hold of that and say, it's not about fairness in the moment, it's about justice, long-term, across the span of history.
Yeah.
God's justice is involved and at stake. And it almost like moves us into the right position now to start thinking more clearly about that.
Yeah, I agree. The entire idea of having to wait and see this out is, I mean, we it's very easy to see in that sort of father-son, parent-child context. And then again, you flip it around and our impatience to God, our Father. If you really just are honest with yourself and step back, you can see that and see that parallel. But all too often, I think we get caught up in our own rationalization. We skip past that or don't pay attention to that or intentionally, willfully ignore it, whatever it may be. And we're just so focused on, no, these things need to be fixed now and they need to be this way now. And I'm convicted of it. And we lose all of that context around the fact that we're all a work in progress. God ultimately will be the judge. I mean, the passage that I also referenced around, first of all, the fact that it's God's judgment and the fact that it will be in his time is Ecclesiastes 3:17. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. And obviously the big part of that's focused on both the righteous and the unrighteous being judged and that it's God's. But I put the emphasis here on there will be a time. He says that twice, right? There will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. And we so often want to dictate when that is, right? Because we want to see it. We want that gratification of justice playing out, again, so long as it's not us. For that, we want more time. Like, give me some time to fix it.
Yeah.
God, please let me get this straight. But for everybody else, except for my exception list, everybody else, I'd like to see it play out in real time. But for the rest of us, hold on a minute.
Yeah, that's how we are. It's so true. And what about the persistent widow in Luke 18, the point that's made there?
Yeah, I think this is interesting because I had only recently looked at this parable again through this lens and how much it sort of reinforces all of this idea too. And it has another little element to it that I think is interesting. Obviously, it reinforces justice is to God, not us, and it's by his judgment. It also says he will do it speedily.
Yes.
But again, what is fast to God relative to what is speedily to us, I think is the thing that we have to keep in perspective there. Mm-hmm. And that can cause somebody to say, oh, well, see, he allows these bad things to happen and things to unfold over time and years. And clearly it's not true because he didn't do it speedily. And again, it's on a relative scale.
And I would say be very careful because when a thief in the night appears, it's speedily.
Yes.
He's in and out. And that's the picture given of the return of the Lord, that he'll come as a thief in the night. And so will he come speedily? Will he justify speedily? Yes. It's like you said, we're using the wrong measuring stick to say, well, speedily is 2 seconds and I've been down here for 10 years. That's not the point of that.
And when you're eternal, I mean, we're a blink of an eye and there's a lot of room for things to be fast, but still not on our time frame, right?
Yes.
The other thing about this parable, though, too, is it talks about, it basically lays out persistence. The widow is persistent here. It's not just, you give up and throw your hands in the air and say there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, and I think this was an interesting example because this is honestly it's a parable I don't know about you, Danny, but I haven't ever heard it mentioned much. I mean, it comes up occasionally, but there's so many others that you hear more frequently because
that's true.
The lessons are either more overt or more applicable. But when I looked back through this, I thought this is really interesting because there's a lot more subtlety here, and subtlety was what I needed, right? Like I needed the things that were helping with the nuance of incorporating this into my day-to-day. I'll recount it here. He told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not to lose heart. He said, in a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect, who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? So I don't think the lesson to be taken away, though, is to be annoying. It's not necessarily to be the squeaky wheel.
And we can make God cry out, uncle.
Right, exactly. That is not it at all. But there is a lesson there that's taken away around the persistence and the fact that continue after the right path.
Keep going to the right one.
That. Keep going to the right person.
Yeah, exactly.
Or keep going to the right one, not person, but the Father, right? Keep going to the one who can actually make that difference. And I think we can do that in a lot of different ways, whether that's through prayer, whether it's continued obedience, continued study. All of those things will reinforce it. And for me, there's definitely been times in my life where I would not jump to the conclusion that God actively made something change right in that moment. But boy, the circumstances sure unfolded in such a way that I had not foreseen that allowed things to change or improve.
Yep.
And I do give God the glory of that. Whether he cared so much about my specific instance in that case to make the change, or my continued work at it, where he sought mercy or willingness to make things where the opportunities were there, or whatever it may be. I'm not going to try and unravel or pretend to understand exactly how he works and which things he is intentional about, but he is aware and persists and allows all things for his purposes. And so when I see those things change, I know that whether it was willful change or whether it was permitted because of a dedication or because of a try, the attempt, the work, the effort, that regardless, it made a change. It impacted something. Something started going in the right way, or started changing and started making a positive influence. And a lot of times it wasn't still even necessarily the outcome I wanted, but I started to understand it better.
Yeah, it might have turned out even better than what you were initially hoping for.
Exactly.
There's an old Chinese proverb that says, providence assists not the idle. And so that's basically what you're saying, that the persistence, this is not a Chinese proverb, it's from Jesus.
Yeah.
Be persistent. He gave the parable so that men ought always to pray. That's how Luke 18 starts.
Exactly.
This is the point. So as you said, continue to go to the one who can have an impact on your situation, and to know that he will justify speedily, and to trust in that there's great peace granted to us that we've done those things that God has told us to do, and we have faith in him. And whether speedily is on my clock or his, it will happen the way he said it will.
That's right. It annoys the kids, but I got to where I would say patience always wins. It just never wins now.
No way, your kids were annoyed by that? Patience always wins. Just not now, huh?
That's in Ben Proverbs 1-2 or something.
Nice. That's hilarious. And all of that runs contrary to what the world tells us is fair.
Exactly.
That's probably the biggest
and the
point.
time frame, and the way to judge it. And you go do what is yours. Go get it, and don't stop until it's changed. Do whatever you need to do. It needs to happen quickly. Like the speed is something that the world disagrees with, and which is portrayed here. The judgment of what is fair and right is different, because it should be about what you deserve. We all love a good revenge story.
Yes,
even when we
do.
know better. Even when we know that's not the way to be. I'm not going to be Batman, but we do. We do like to see those injustices corrected when we can witness it in real time, right? Or as close to, as quickly as it happened as possible, because we want that gratification. right? And,
Yes.
and that is everything the opposite of what God is telling us is what's good for us.
Yeah. And he basically says, you need to relinquish that desire for yourself to make justice play out in those smaller cases, because in Romans 12 it says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." So don't repay evil with evil, but continue to repay evil with good. So again, all contrary to the worldly standard and how the world addresses things, and sometimes us and our carnal fighting that we have in the spiritual battle that's going on within us. It's certainly still there, and you and I have both acknowledged that. But to know that God will handle it and he'll do it right that's amazing. If it was left to me, there'd be a lot of people who wouldn't be on this earth that may need more time, to come to a better place in their own lives. And in the moment, I wasn't ready to give them that. God knows all of those things. And when he lets them go, and I can say with peace in my heart, vengeance belongs to God. They hurt me bad, but the Lord knows what to do better than I do, that he will settle that. And again, not in the moment. People don't catch on fire that do me wrong. It happens. Most of this will be accomplished in eternity.
Right.
Not to take away what happens here, because some things do and don't based on God's immutable laws, but his judgment is forever. And so, we wouldn't wish condemnation on anybody because we don't understand it. And when he decides that that's the right move, then it'll be his decision and not mine. So again, it pulls me out of that dark place where I would have to pass such terrible judgment on someone simply because they've done something wrong to me.
Yeah.
This idea of fair gets really, I'm glad you laid that out in the beginning, because as you were making that more clear to me, I can just see how many different directions this can go wrong.
Yeah.
If I say, well, this is fair, and I look to a room of people, right? Everybody agree? And everyone's shaking their head no, because it's like, well, no, you didn't think about this or that. Well, what happens to me? So fair is subjective, and you're not going to get 3 people in a room to all nod in agreement that this is fair without harboring something in their heart that I think I'm getting the short end of the stick. So forget fair, ultimately.
If you try to play that out, one of the things that I would do a lot whenever I was trying to come to terms with faith and the word is, okay, well, let me play everything out without it. Let's play out the whole idea of using fair. And you actually see it in the world. It's not that hard, because so much of the world tries to do it without any objective standard and without anything that's been decreed or even agreed, even by a majority that this is fair, right? Like, it's not even, and much less that. Like, is it fair that when you really start to deconstruct this, you can drive yourself crazy if you really, really take it all the way through to its end. How do you decide what's fair? And simplistically, people will say, well, we all get to vote, the majority will win. So it's just fair just because more people thought it was fair than wasn't. Is that really fair? Right? Like, is that true? Because let's look at history. There are plenty of things that the majority of people decided to do that were not fair.
Nope.
They were not fair at all. They were not right and not even close.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's changed over time. So it was once fair and now it's not. Did the standard change or did the people? And if you could just play this game of trying to make everything fair for everybody in life, good luck.
Yeah.
You will not win. It is a losing proposition. There is no way to set it up in which our team, right? Let's go back to our team, that playing the best players will be the rule, or playing everybody equally will be the rule. And you just leave it up to the coach's decision of what's fair. Nobody knows going in what it's going to be. It's up to the whims of the coach and how they feel that moment.
It's already not fair.
Some people are going to be angry no matter how you resolve it, right? And we go back to the question you asked earlier with God laying out his word and being just. Is that fair? That's the whole point. He laid it out. He's communicated it. We can look at it. We can understand it, and we can make a decision about it. And when you start putting all these other sort of subjective ways of looking at the world out there, who gets to make the decision? How did we come to that decision? What are the ways that you decide it? It just becomes a mess. Yes. And even if you land as something that the majority of people agree with for some period of time, it changes. And all that points to the fact that we are fickle. Mm-hmm. We are fickle, and we are emotional, and we are temperamental, and we are reactive. Therefore, that makes us inconsistent. All the things that God is not.
Exactly. That is so good. We have to do trivia questions. Do you have any other because like I said, I know you spent a lot of time and you dedicated yourself to this. And there's just a lot of things kind of unfolded for you in your time and in God's time. Is there anything else that is worth mentioning in fairness versus justice?
I just encourage someone who's hearing all of that and still what tends to happen is, okay, but you go to the most extreme examples of awful things in this world and say that's still really hard to stomach. And yes, it is. I would never try to tell somebody that is now less deplorable. Whether you look at awful things that people do to other people or whatever, injustice and such in the world and things like that, it doesn't make the instances of that any less painful in the moment and any less difficult to observe or to encounter. Mm-hmm. But you still have to step back from that again and look at those things and say, but in the bigger picture, if there is an eternity, if there's a soul for me to care about after this life, that is a much bigger picture than even this intense, really difficult, horrible anguish and pain that may be going on right now. And you have to keep that in perspective. And that leads to a whole nother line of questioning, which we can maybe get into some other time, which is, okay, but what if I'm not sure that there is an eternity or there is anything beyond this life? And I would say, well, in that case, then it's going to be painful for a while, but at one point we're all going to cease to live and you will not know about it anyway. So no matter how you slice this, it's temporal.
Yeah.
It's temporal. And either there's a greater place to be that you can choose to keep that in perspective while you go through life and deal with these difficulties, or you can take the choice that there's not. But either way, everything happening here will be temporal in your viewpoint.
It's going to come to an end.
It's going to come to an end.
It always does. There's no exceptions for that. I appreciate you doing that. You kind of just back up and concede to the obvious point. Because typically for me, especially if I'm like driving home a point, I get tempted to say, forget that, forget it. And that's not fair to someone who's still genuinely wrestling with that, which makes me far too harsh. And you're willing to concede, I think, first and foremost with yourself as you went through that thought process. But then that remains within you to when you talk to someone else. And if there's anyone hearing this, to say to them, oh, it's real. What you're feeling is awful, and this is not fair. And I think everyone who would sit down with you would agree to that.
Right.
But in the grand scheme, long-term, eternal side, how does that change things? So that is very interesting. I love that. That's deep, but that's the kind of guy you are. That's why I asked you to come here and get us straight on some of that because of the time and effort you put into it. Really,
glad some overthinking could come in handy. So.
Oh yeah, because that's kind of you're kind of a pro at it, from what I understand.
Yeah, a lot of practice.
Some people, man. That's why this is good to kind of just reach out and to say those things to others who are in kind of in that line of the way they reason and think things through. That it is. The thought is constantly stirring and moving, and they're trying to deal with that. So you're that person, and you've done that, and you've reached a conclusion that God is who he says he is, and that he's just, and he does not deal with fairness as something that he measures out and deals with from moment to moment. So that is all very good for us to think about and to really to meditate on. I asked you about trivia questions. You said you did have them. So,
I do.
Okay, so I'm gonna let you go first, and I can't remember if you went first last time or not.
I can't remember either.
Okay, good, because
I just know that I get,
fair.
And now I'm anxious because I'm like, oh, it's gonna be embarrassing if I can't answer.
Okay, we'll give you some time to not be embarrassed and ask the first question.
I can Google search or no?
No.
Okay, sorry.
No.
Well, I'm making sure the rules are laid out so that we're fair ahead of time. I'm just making sure I know.
Sweet trivia.
How many coins did the poor widow offer?
And this is not a trick question.
Not a trick question.
Okay.
It's not a trick question.
2.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Mark 12:42.
Nice. Okay. Well, good. First trivia question for you. The second one for everyone else out there. According to 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 6, Paul planted, Apollos watered. What did God give?
Man. God gave it's like, I know even the phrase is on the tip of my tongue. You're going to have to post-edit this a little bit for me, Danny, because I'm just like.
No way, man. I planted.
The increase.
Yes.
Sorry. I just like literally, like I knew the word and I just couldn't find it. It's like those brain cells dying all of a sudden, getting
Yeah.
old.
And
Yes,
hey,
God gave the increase.
Trivia on the spot will do that to you. But you got it right. That is 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 6. Paul planted, Apollos watered, God gave the increase. Very good.
My mind was going through lift, raise, what was it? Like,
Plant. He planted something. Yeah.
he gave it did it. It did it. It's true. All right. Well, at least got 50-50, so I don't know if I get a current gold star, but we'll see.
You got it so far.
All right. So this one, not necessarily a trick question, but we'll just see the way I come at it, if it makes sense to you. Who in the Bible was the least likely to get a Happy Mother's Day card?
Oh, yeah, that's a sideways angle for sure.
Or a Happy Anniversary card?
In the New Testament?
Old Testament.
Old Testament, least likely. Oh, I think I know this. Athaliah?
Yeah.
Wow. I can't believe I pulled that up. Man, yeah, she's that wicked old woman who killed all of her offspring to be the queen, isn't she?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, she's not getting any Happy Mother's Day cards.
No, not at all. And yeah, I figured the easiest way to ask that, like it would have been too much of a giveaway, is just like who was the only queen out of the divided kingdoms. But I was like, it'd be much more fun to see.
Absolutely. I like having fun, man. Especially, I got it right. So, and what's the book
Oh
chapter
yeah.
number?
Let's see. 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 16, 11 through 16, through 11:16 is where a lot of that story is, as well as 2 Chronicles 22:10 to 23:1.
Wow. Wicked woman,
Pieces
man.
of it woven all through, because it's
Yeah. And it's a long story. There's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Josiah's in there. He's growing up. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Okay, great question. I like the way you asked it too. Final question of the day. What is the last book in the Bible written by Moses?
Written by Moses. Oh,
What are you doing with your fingers?
Deuteronomy?
Yep. I know what you're doing with your fingers. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers.
I don't know why I needed my fingers to do it, but
5 books.
It's
5 books in the law. I think I may have done the same thing. The answer
I was singing
is
in my head,
Deuteronomy.
too. I was singing it in my head, so I was like, oh,
Whatever
sure.
it takes, man. This is trivia. This is serious business. So we've looked at this idea in the Understandable Objections part 2, is God fair? There's one more passage that really speaks to this, and I think it's very interesting the way it unfolds. So I want to finish with this. In Matthew 20, we have the men who are employed by a master of a vineyard, and he employs them in the morning, and then at lunchtime he goes back to the marketplace, employs more, and then he gets there about 6 p.m. or so. The sun starts starting to set. He finds more men, and he goes ahead and he hires them for the same amount. And so at the end of the day, he's going to pay all of his workers. In Matthew 20 and verse 11, it says, when they had received it, this is the final guys who worked the longest throughout the day, because he paid the 11th hour workers first. It says, when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? That is an amazing question that Jesus gives to us from this parable, that an agreement was made, the rules were set. And when they agreed, okay, we'll do that, they immediately looked at, wait a second, that's not fair. They worked in the cool of the evening. We worked in the heat of the day. It just screams, life isn't fair. And he says, actually, it is perfectly just because you agreed with me. In other words, you're accountable for that. And so, the reason I think that's really beautiful is because I'll just finish with what Peter said. This is what spurs on this parable. In Matthew 19 and verse 27, then Peter answered and said to him, see, we've left all and followed you. Therefore, what shall we have?